Hello and welcome to Crafting Changes Quick class. Today we're making a fleece earwarmer headband by HelloSewing.com. But we're going to use a different construction method so there won't be any exposed seam in the back to potentially irritate the wearer. And we're going to use contrast fleece binding. For the basic pattern, please head over to HelloSewing.com/fleece ear warmer headband and download the pattern. Now let's get started. So now that you've cut out two pattern pieces on the fold with the stretch going around the headband, and I'm going to be using contrasting materials so you can see my sewing method, you'll also need one strip 2 inches wide, the width across your fleece, which will be about 58-60 inches wide. And this is the contrast, and one strip of this is going to be enough. Okay, so set that aside. We're going to use this in just a little bit. Set my pattern aside. And what I need to do is I need to find out what is the right and wrong side of my fleece. And remember, fleece rolls to the wrong side. So I'm going to mark my wrong side so I don't get confused. Mark the both pieces of fleece to make sure I have the wrong sides. Now this from here is going to be different from what we did before. Now we've got our headband stacked with wrong sides together and right sides on the outside. We're going to measure from both the bottom and the top edge in 2 inches and pin. Our last method, we just did it on one side, but this method, we're doing it on both the bottom and the top on both ends. And so this is your stopping point for when you're stitching the band together. Go ahead and use a 1/4 inch seam allowance and just stitch these two pieces together just so they can stay together and not shift when we go to apply the binding. But leave the end 2 inches open. Now that you got both the top and the bottom of the band stitched together, leaving the 2 inches free at the end, we're going to take these pink side, remember these are both right sides, we're going to put them together and we're going to sew the center back seam with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I like to start off on my fabric and go back to the end and then come forward, and it seems to work a lot better. But we're going to sew this together, back stitch when we get done with the end, cut the threads. Okay, now we got to do that to the other side, but it's going to be done just a little bit differently. Let's get this out of the way. So we're going to have to put these right sides together, and that's why we've got this opening, is so we can get that pulled up and sewn. So let me do that one more time. We've got the right sides sewn together for the center back of the pink, and now we need to do the right sides together for the center back of the blue. And so take your blue, pull in the right sides together, and then bring it out to give you room to sew. And that's why we left those openings there, so we can pull this to the side that we needed it to stitch it. Now to help hold that, I'm just going to pin that so it doesn't shift on me. And we're going to do the same thing now. We're going to sew the blue together at the center back. Trim some of that off. And now when you pull that out, you see we've got both the center back on the pink and the blue sewn, and we are still okay with having our raw edges up here. So finger press those seams open, match them up with each other, and pin this shut up here, because then what we'll do is go back and just stitch this together like we did the top and the bottom, and just stitch close to the edge and close that up on both the top and the bottom. Okay, my headband is all ready to go to apply the binding on it on the edge. And yeah, I know it looks a little bit ratty, but that binding is going to cover the edge and it's going to be gorgeous when we're done. So this back seam that we just took care of, I'm finger pressing that down. And so we still have the nice and closed back seam that's not going to irritate the wearer. And that's where we're going to start when we put on the binding. So let me turn this to the pink so you can see it. Now the binding, we don't want any of the selvage on there, so cut that off. And what you're going to do is you're going to come in and put a starting marker about 1 inch away from the end of the pin. Okay, because that's where you're going to start sewing this to the headband. So I don't like to match this right up with this back seam because I think it gets too bulky by the time you're done. So let's offset it just about 1 inch away. And I'm going to go around the whole band and pin the binding to the band, leaving about 1 inch flap. And when I get around to the other side, we're going to leave 1 inch flap there too and pin it just right to the edge. We're not going to sew through this, but just right up to it. So let me do that and I'll be back and show you how it looks. Now I've sewn around my headband, starting and back tacking at this lead pin, and I went all the way around and I came to the second pin, stopping, back tacking, and I did not sew through this flap. So you can see that they're still separated but stitched very close to each other. Now take these pins out, and you know what you need to do next is you need to seam this together. So mark your seam line to where this contrast band is going to be flush with the headband. And then go ahead and pull this up and stitch across here, making sure not to sew through the headband. All you're doing is just sewing these tails together. Then when you're done, trim that off, and then repeat this for the other side. Now that you've got the contrasting band sewn onto the headband, take it, pull it up, and with your fingers, push the seam allowance up. So when you roll this around, your seam allowance is going to be up inside of this contrasting band. And then I like to take straight pins for this, and I pin down here and I pin through the excess so I know that there's not going to be crunching up of this excess material. So with this hand, I'm pushing the seam allowance up inside the band, and then taking a pin and pinning it down. And do this all the way around the headband. And I'd just like to check to make sure that I don't have this wrinkled up. Make sure that's nice and flat. And while you're doing that, every once in a while, just check for consistency to see if you've got the same width pinned around your band. So continue in this manner until you've got both the front continue in this manner until you've got both the top and the bottom pinned up, and then you're going to sew right in this seam right here. It's called stitching in the ditch. So put this underneath your presser foot and center your needle and stitch right here, and you'll go through all of these layers of material all the way through here. Now I've already done the other side, so you can see on the top that my band is pretty well consistent and the back is nice and straight. And then my last step is I'm going to take my scissors and we're going to trim away this excess. So I'll make my initial little snip, being careful not to cut through the stitching that we already done. And it's fairly easy if you keep your scissors kind of parallel to the material. You'll want to leave just a little bit of extra without cutting through that stitching line. So that's how it should look after you get it trimmed off. And because it's fleece, it's not going to ravel, so this is very acceptable just to leave the inside like this. So I'm going to finish up pinning and stitching and trimming my hat, and we'll see what it looks like when we come back. And there you have it, our version of HelloSewing.com Fleece Ear Warmer Headband 2.0 with contrast. I hope you enjoyed this video, and please let me know if you have any questions. And thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much for sewing with us. We really do appreciate it.